the government trying to muzzle the digital news media. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today is on the government's new proposed broadcast bill. If you remember, even last year, this bill was making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Now there is a new draft, not yet officially available with most members of parliament, but one that some experts have been looking at closely to warn that what is coming is something that could potentially muzzle creators like myself, but also others whom you may follow, whether you like them, dislike them, agree with them, or disagree with them. There are many, many proposals in this bill, but the most contentious of them are treating those on YouTube and platforms like Instagram as digital news creators and subjecting them not just to self regulation, but a three-tier regulatory format, one that ends with a government run broadcast advisory council. Further, intermediaries, social media intermediaries, will now be criminally liable. And in fact, they will have to be compliant when the government asks them for specific information. Also, digital content news creators will now have to mandatorily have a content evaluation panel. These are only some of the changes, and digital content creators are arguing that if this bill becomes law, it will mean the end of independent digital media, in particular, those who aren't running large scale corporate backed companies could take the biggest hit. To talk about what this bill proposes, does it have any welcome points, or is it all just gloom and doom for those of us who are in the digital current affairs space? Nikhil Pahwa is with us. Nikhil, of course, leads Medianama. He is, I think, the country's foremost expert on this bill and many other affiliated issues. So, Nikhil, thank you. Grateful for your time and for helping us understand this bill better. One, it's important to say that your reporting and the reporting by the Hindustan Times has been the primary reporting that we have available. This bill's official version is not yet placed with most members of parliament, and that in itself is a problem because stakeholders haven't had a transparent opportunity to debate its provisions. How concerned are you just about that before we get into what we know about the bill?
Look, Barkha, it's not just the bill, but the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has been holding meetings with specific industry stakeholders for a month now. And in each meeting, we've discussed various parts of the bill, not disclosing the exact language. But 2 weeks ago, they gave a select group of people, we don't know exactly how many of them, copies of the bill. Multiple people I've spoken with have copies. I have looked at those copies, and on the basis of that, I've done my reporting, as has the Hindustan Times, which is in fact reported really well on the meetings as well. So everything's happening in secrecy, in with only with corporate stakeholders. In fact, I had a conversation with the Editors Guild a while back, and my contention was that broadcasters and social media platforms are being called for the meetings, but those who are representing online news are not being invited. And in fact, online news entities, the Editors Guild, which represents editors across the board, have also not received copies of this bill, but it's been circulated. Now, even the manner of circulation makes me worry, because what's happening is they've watermarked each bill diagonally with a specific number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And each number corresponds to a different entity. So even as journalists, we're not able to get physical copies of the bill or get photocopies or even a digital copy or a scan, because everyone's afraid that if it leaks from us, then they might get identified as being the entities that actually leaked the bill. So I don't understand this need for secrecy. It impacts us. It impacts everyone on the internet. But the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting is being very guarded about sharing this bill, when frankly, given the substantive changes that are taking place, it deserves a second public consultation, so that all of us as citizens who are impacted, both as creators as well as consumers, can actually comment on it and give the ministry feedback on how to improve it.
Yeah. So let's get right to it. All the information we have, as I said, is available from Medianama and the Hindustan Times. As you mentioned, the lack of transparency itself is a key issue. There's the Medianama reporting, and let's get now to some of the specific points. The big, of course, lead point is that YouTube, Instagram, those of us who do current affairs on these platforms will now be regulated in the same way as digital news broadcasters. Now, let's start with this. What is the problem? Some might ask. I can see the problems, I know the problems, but if you had to explain to our audience who might say, okay, you're doing news, you're doing current affairs, why should you not be subjected to the same regulation as the big TV channels? What would you say to that? And what is the big alarm about treating us as if we are digital news broadcasters? The one important thing to remember is most people who are doing current affairs and news on digital platforms are small companies. They are not backed by big business houses. They are, companies ranging between 15 to 30 to 50 people maximum. That's most digital companies. And to mire all of us in a sort of maze of bureaucracy, requirements, costs, that in itself is a problem to start with. But go ahead, Nikhil.
So look, let's make it really simple. Uh, let's take Virat Kohli on Twitter. At times, he does comment on news and current affairs. For example, if India wins medals at the Olympics, I'm sure as a sportsman, he's going to comment on it. He also runs influencer campaigns on his platform. As someone who runs a systematic business activity on Instagram or on Twitter as an influencer, the moment he comments on news, he will become a digital news broadcaster because of the broad definition of this bill. There is no threshold of users as well. So it's not just Virat Kohli. It could be someone who runs a personal blog who might be commenting on the news of the day or on the environment in the country, or let's say some tragedy that might have happened, about how they feel about it. Since they're commenting on news and current affairs and they run, let's say, Google ads on that blog, they will become digital news broadcasters as well. So it's not that Instagram and YouTube are being treated as broadcasters, it's the people who are using these platforms that are being treated as broadcasters. So point number two here is that um, it doesn't even though these people are being treated as news broadcasters, they will have to now go and sign up with a association or a self-regulatory organization, and that
Within one
self-regulatory
month,
organ
within 1 month, within
within
1 month of the bill
1 month
being
of the bill
passed,
being notified, uh,
being
and
notified. Sorry. Yeah.
they'll have to send they will have to send their personal information to the ministry. Now imagine the millions of people who will have to do that. There is a fees attached to it. What's going to happen? People will stop talking about news online, right? In the same vein, for news broadcasters, they will also have to be subjected to a government advisory to broadcast advisory council that can censor their content, or that can give them directions. They'll have to set up a grievance redressal mechanism. The number of complaints that they might end up getting because of something that they've written or tweeted or shared on
Hmm.
Instagram or on Facebook, they will have to now respond to it complaint by complaint. Otherwise, they will be liable. And social media platforms can be directed by the government to censor their content, to censor the news that they're commenting on. Amit Verma, for example, runs this fantastic
Podcast.
podcast called The Seen and the Unseen, and they discuss news and current affairs in that podcast as well. Amit also runs a great clear writing workshop. Because he promotes his workshop on his podcast, that's a systematic business activity. He'll have to register as a news broadcaster. So the other crazy thing is it's not just applicable to anyone in India, it's applicable across the globe, which
I
means
mean, I
that
think I think you tweeted saying Taylor Swift is now under the new broadcast
no,
bill
no.
potentially.
So it's not news broadcast, but Taylor Swift is a different game altogether. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, you
Donald
did. Yeah,
Donald Trump, who tweets about news events, and you can say that as a politician, it's his business activity to market himself tweeting about news.
yeah.
May also get covered under this bill. So what do we get here? It's not going to be applied to everyone, which means that by design, the bill is going to be implemented arbitrarily, and it's when you do something that the government of India doesn't like, they will throw the rule book at you. So they might,
Hmm.
for example, go after a Dhruv Rathi who's operating from Germany,
But go
but
after
they may not.
how? Can I understand? And this is a very important point that you said, because the bill allows for the government to actually exempt people it wants to exempt, right? There's a clause in there which says that they can make exceptions. They can make exceptions if there's someone
For
who's going through
hardships,
severe for hardship.
for
Severe,
hardship. Correct.
yeah.
So, for
Just
example, there might be someone who might be, for example, pro-government.
yeah, I understand. Like, there are plenty of them,
Yeah,
right?
and so they might get exempt from this. Traditional newspapers and traditional broadcasters might actually be exempt from this bill, whereas those who are not doing broadcast might be impacted. The other thing is, what I don't understand is, how is this broadcast? It is unicast. So today the internet is, you don't, you consume news, you consume current affairs, you pull it, you choose to view that content, and you go on YouTube and press play to watch something. So it's not a broadcast, it's a unicast. And broadcast is communication to the public. Here it's communication to you individually when you view it, right? The other thing is, you can chance upon something in case of in while going through TV channels on news platforms. You have no control over what you're viewing. In this
Mm-hmm.
case, you have control. In fact, the Attorney General of India, Mukul Rohtgi, I think it was in 2014, there was a case in the Supreme Court to ban pornography. And representing the Union of India, uh, Mukul Rohtgi, who was the Attorney General at that time, came out and said that we don't want to do moral policing. We Someone is watching something in the privacy of their bedroom. Now, explain to me how the same rationale cannot apply to everything on the internet. We're watching it on
Yeah,
personal devices. We're watching it on screens. We're choosing to watch it in the privacy of our domain. The government is
yeah.
basically coming in and preventing us, or potentially preventing us, from watching it. But the other really worrying factor is, I treat this as censorship by compliance, in the sense the burden is so heavy that half the people will stop doing this. And that applies not just to news content, but non-news as well. In fact, in non-news, the compliance burden is even more.
So let's pick this up step by step. One, you said people will stop talking about news online. Let's come to organizations later. Later, let's start with individuals. You gave this example of, let's say, Virat Kohli comments on news, and I don't know, wades into a conversation that somebody doesn't like potentially. Then technically or theoretically, an individual can be hauled up. Individuals on social media are already dealing with hyperpartisanship, organized trolling, virtual bullying. Now you add potentially a sort of legal responses. So one is, you're saying it diminishes the space, the town hall, public town hall space for conversations about news and current affairs. That's the first fallout.
Well, even with grievance judicial mechanism, let's say I set up a bot to file
Yeah,
100,000 grievance redressal complaints against you. And using
yeah,
AI, I can actually automate to have different language each time.
yeah, yeah.
Just going through those 100,000 requests will make you feel, why am I doing this? Right? You'll have
Correct.
to hire someone specially to go and do this. So the moment they want to shut down someone, you basically
Yeah.
can game the grievance redressal mechanism, because under the IT rules, not responding to that mechanism will make you liable.
Yeah. Now let's come to this mandatory, please correct me if I'm wrong, mandatory content evaluation panel that we're all supposed to have if this bill becomes law. Can you explain this?
So for non-news, that is for broadcasters who do entertainment, which means travel bloggers,
But what if
food
but,
bloggers.
but what if you do both? What if here at the Mojo Story we do something that is in the entertainment genre? What happens?
So if you're doing entertainment, then there's a minimum threshold uh, that the government will specify. They haven't specified yet as to how many
Mhm.
users you need to have in terms of followers, etc. Beyond that, you'll have to be compliant, which means if you're doing both, and this is not something I've discussed before, but thank you for asking this. So you'll have to set up a content evaluation committee comprising of someone from women and child welfare, someone from SC ST, etc. Which means that there might be rules that specify the details of who should be in that content evaluation committee, and they will have to certify your non-news content before it goes out. Which means they will have to watch everything, which means you'll probably have to pay them to evaluate your content.
And in the news
Uh,
space, and in the news space,
in
you
the
need a
news space,
grievance redressal.
my understanding is there is no content evaluation committee. In fact, in the previous version in 2023, in November, the content evaluation committee was also applicable to news. There were complaints, and that was removed. So that's
Okay.
now been
Now you
removed. So for live events, it's also not there.
Okay. Now you said that they can potentially go after somebody they don't like. Let's say a Dhruv Rathi, who was a very sort of critical voice of this government in the election campaign. What does it mean to go after somebody, whether it's Dhruv Rathi or somebody else, right? Tomorrow it could be another government and they could go after a completely different set of people if this becomes law. That's also important to stress that right now there are, in this hyper partisan world, some people are on this side and some people are on this side. But tomorrow, all of those sides could change and the law will still be there. When you say go after somebody, what do you mean? Dhruv Rathi, the best I know, lives in Germany. What does it mean to
Yes.
go after him?
So, one, they could ask him to come and register with the government of
And
India.
if he chooses
And if
not
he
to, and if he
if he
chooses
chooses
not to,
not to, and if he chooses not to, because he does both news and non and some amount of entertainment content, if you can, or analysis content, if you can
Mhm.
consider it that. If he doesn't comply, the government can ask social media platforms to force him to comply. And if the social media platforms don't are not able to make him comply, then the liability then the social media platforms become liable. So effectively, you're saying that so social media platforms could, for example, could give him a warning and ask him to comply. If he doesn't do that, they could shut down his channel for all you know, because
So
they don't
those
want to be
who, so those who, so those who believe that, oh, let's just register our companies outside India, you're saying if this bill becomes law, that's no protection.
that is no protection, and that's probably by design, because in the previous version of this bill, the person who was regulated was supposed to be an individual who is a citizen of India or a company with members who are citizens of India, and so on and so forth. Um, in this version, the phrase citizen of India, at least when it comes to an individual, has been removed, which means any individual in the world will be governed under this. You don't
and
even
and
have
and,
to
and if
register a
and if
company.
and if they don't agree to sort of conform to the three-tier regulation that the bill demands, then technically the government could ask YouTube, Instagram, whatever platform they're on, to block their channels.
Correct. That's exactly what
because,
is likely to happen here.
because the intermediaries are now criminally liable. They're not treated just as intermediaries.
Yes, and well, they are still treated as intermediaries, but they don't have safe harbor protection, which means they are now liable, and they're potentially criminally liable if they don't act on it. And frankly, I don't think social media intermediaries will risk their entire business for one or two individuals, which means
Yeah.
it's likely that they will people will get impacted.
Now, one of our audience members, Prasad, says that, but do you agree that there should be regulation given the amount of content of news and media that there is on digital media? And I think it's an interesting question because one of the somewhat better changes in this draft of the bill, please correct me if I'm wrong, seems to be that earlier somebody could complain about you directly to the government-run Broadcast Advisory Council. Now, the Broadcast Advisory Council that is run by the government can only hear appeals if self regulation fails, but everybody has to sign up with some self regulatory body. That's how it
Correct.
used to be in TV as well. Does that in itself seem fair, or are there things there too that we're missing?
I think the government is just trying to reduce its own workload, because the mistake that they made with the IT rules was that you could complain at any level.
Hmm.
And so, therefore, the most effective way of space to complain was the government, because they have the ultimate power. And so
Right.
people would, instead of going to a channel, to a news website, or a streaming service directly, they could straight away complain to the government level. They were probably getting overwhelmed, which is why they've said that you can only come to us after different phases, right? After you've first gone to a grievance redressal mechanism, then gone to a self-regulatory organization. Finally, when you come to us.
Yeah. So we have comments coming in. Tarun Kaushik saying this is clearly a measure to restrict opinions and discussions. Anti right wing, I assume he means anti right wing opinions can be highly restricted with this. And again, Tarun, it's important to say that tomorrow the government could be somebody else. It could be a whole different bunch of content creators who are at the receiving end. So this really does impact everybody. But then, Nikhil, Anju Sharma says, look what's happening in Bangladesh. Censorship does not work. The internet, the digital space, you get onto a VPN, you can still potentially stream, I guess, or not.
You can consume content through a VPN, yes, and that's why many people are switching to VPNs or using VPNs. Because frankly, look, we've all grown up with an internet that is global. We've learned from what's
Yeah.
happening in other countries. We learn from opinion pieces. I mean, there's so many founders who primarily listen to podcasts that are happening in the US because that's what helps them become current in terms of what they're doing. We learn from
Mm-hmm.
Paul Graham at Y Combinator. Um, uh, what happens is when there's censorship, there's a different internet that we get compared to a different internet that the rest of the world gets, and that's the same thing that's happening in China. In a sense, India has China envy. But I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to address one point, Perka, that one of your viewers had left earlier, that shouldn't online news be regulated on YouTube, and there are people having conversations while smoking or drinking on camera. And I think that's an important question to ask
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what are we as viewers in this country comfortable with. And I know every country has its own culture, but let's not
Mm-hmm.
forget that culture evolves. We
Yeah.
also as people evolve. You'll remember I was in school at that time. In Back in the 90s, there was this song which caused a huge controversy, and people went out, and mobs came out criticizing it. It was a song called "Sexy, Sexy, Sexy." Mujhe log bolne. The word "sexy" was seen as something which is not Indian culture at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
Mm-hmm.
acceptable today. So
Mm-hmm.
look, art pushes the boundaries. Rap, for example, there's a song that's becoming very popular in the last couple of days by a singer called Hanuman Kind. Now, those lyrics are not necessarily palatable to all, but he's pushing the boundaries. Niazi's rap also does the same thing. Rap, by definition, challenges and pushes the boundaries, right?
Right.
Uh, I think as we have to grow up as people, what we're seeing over here is the implementation of a nanny state. And I think, as much as we are concerned about its application to news and current affairs, I'm very concerned about its application to non-news content because they're anyway overburdened. Like there are, look at what happens on television. Words
Mm-hmm.
like breast are actually uh, bleeped out, and they don't even show up in subtitles. So that's the kind of censorship that we see on television. OTT has given us freedom. Streaming services have given us freedom to watch the kind of content we want to watch. I finished watching season 3 of Mirzapur a little late yesterday, last night, in fact. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. I mean, the amount of violence in that show is insane. I can't imagine that going through a censor board, right? But it's such a great show with such intensity, and it's so well written that I don't regret watching it despite all the violence that I've seen. Shouldn't we allow people to watch the kind of content they
Hmm.
want in the privacy of their own phones and their own
So,
devices?
so I don't because I'm cynical about the bill's intent. I don't actually agree with my next question, but I'm going to ask it because it's the logical counter question. That when we talk about fake news epidemics and so on, when we say that one of the challenges for journalism today is that there is such little gatekeeping, should we be protesting all gatekeeping? And again, with the caveat that I think some of the bill's clauses in the form that it's come out on Medianama and Hindustan Times are insane, in my opinion. But do we have to accept or promote or advocate for some degree of editorial gatekeeping instead of saying, "अरे ये तो Facebook है, Twitter है, Instagram है, X है, Y है, इस पे कुछ भी बोलो."
Do we not have tools to address illegal content in this country, to illegal communication in this country? Of course we do.
Illegal, yes, but not fake news. Fake news travels too fast, too wide.
But then how is this going to address fake news anyway? You
Correct.
so the point is, you're not solving the problem here. Again, one could say that a large amount of fake news actually comes from politicians. Politicians actually
Hmm.
amplify fake news. When are they
Yeah,
held accountable, especially during elections, right? So, I mean, accountability is for people and not politicians, not, for people but not political parties, for people but not government. I mean, the government is
yeah,
setting up its own fake news body uh, in order to regulate fake news about itself, becoming a judge in its own matter, effectively, right? Our
yeah,
reporting on this bill, a press information bureau could have easily deemed it false. Answers given by the minister in parliament do not acknowledge the fact that this bill has been given privately to many people, with
yeah.
watermarks and all, right? So, what I don't think the government should be the arbiter of truth. In the same way, when there is harmful content, when there is problematic content, there are restrictions to free speech and there are constitutionally valid mechanisms for it. What you're doing over here is just adding compliance upon compliance upon compliance. First, fix your enforcement. Why
Yeah,
are you
that's a very
making?
good point. That's a very
Yeah,
good point that anything can be taken to court without this bill. Without this bill, if this bill never saw the light of day, if there is somebody who believes that there is something defamatory, untrue, false on any of these platforms, the law of the land does govern published content on all of these platforms.
actually, legally, I'm not even sure if published, like there are self-regulatory codes available, right?
Mhm.
That broadcasters have to comply with. This is not a self-regulatory code. This is a government code that we'll have to comply with. And so
Mm.
I don't think we don't have a content regulator in place, but that's something that's been mooted for a very long time. And it looks like what they're probably going to do is end up making social media platforms the regulators of our content, because the government doesn't have the ability to regulate all of us.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thought that basically you're saying YouTube, X, Meta are going to be our editors.
And that's by design, because the government doesn't want to do the work. They will
Yeah,
create the guidelines and say if people are not compliant to social media platforms, they'll tell them you're at fault. Then
yeah,
what do you do? Because
got
the
it.
rules for social media still not been made in this bill.
Yeah,
They
but
said that for both advertisers and social media intermediaries, they will create a set of rules.
yeah.
That's your content regulation code.
S- So I have in the end a cynical question, and that is that what might be called legacy media, where may not be too exercised by this because they are facing serious competition from contemporary new digital content creators. And as long as their own interests are not very badly hit, do you see the media really coming together? Sorry to be so cynical, all of media, whole of media coming together on this point, or is this a battle that basically independent digital content creators, most of whom, as I said, run moderately sized or small organizations, are going to have to fight?
I, I I think I have no hope from legacy media, because so far they have not just been compliant, they've also been partners with the government when it comes to restrictions. Remember that it was legacy media
Television,
organizations,
television for sure. Television for sure.
television and newspapers, even more than television channels,
Hmm.
who basically came together and pushed in 2020 for a foreign direct investment restriction on news media in India.
Correct, correct.
Remember that they pushed for regulation of digital media under the IT rules, because of which Huffington Post India shut down and Yahoo News India shut down. So they see digital media as competition, and my sense is they're actually pushing for this regulation in order to retain their exclusivity over distribution and publishing, which the democratization of media, of content, has been given to us by the internet. So what this bill does is it's trying to take the Cable Network Televisions Act, and it's trying to force, which is a traditional legacy law,
Yeah.
and it's trying to replace it by force fitting us into that same mold, saying that we are broadcasters. That's it's utterly ridiculous.
So, last question: how does one fight this?
I
You
think
either hope
firstly,
you either hope that the numbers in parliament have altered enough. Firstly, every political party wants to control media. That's the cynic in me speaking. I think at state levels we see you can see that literally every state government has a run-in with its media or gets it to be dependent on it through the route of advertising. That caveat said, it's a tightly contested parliamentary space, so one has to hope that it won't be a easy sail through. But what's the other way of contesting this? Because it's not even officially available to, well, at least to me. I don't know about you.
Correct. So I have it unofficially, but I think we've done enough reporting to indicate what the bill contains, and it's important for citizens of India, for all of us, to write to the government, to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, with our views, at least from a principle standpoint, about what we don't want them doing. And even if someone disagrees with me on some of the points that I've made, please send them. But this is happening as a private consultation. Let's make it into a public consultation. And I think the government should officially make it a public consultation so that we can give them our views. And I hope that Parliament can do something about, restricting this to what the Cable and Networks Television Acts had, or perhaps even give traditional broadcasters and traditional newspapers a little more freedom in terms of how they operate, because they're also overburdened with compliance. But lastly, our hope lies with the Supreme Court, which unfortunately in many cases has not been, it needs to hear
Yeah.
some of the petitions related to the IT rules, which are themselves illegal, in my view. And we have a situation with the where there are cases in the high courts, multiple cases that news organizations have filed in the high courts, which are not moving forward against the IT rules. This bill is
Yeah.
also trying to legitimize the IT rules by making them applicable under a law, whereas they're illegal. So I hope people need to get involved. I hope our courts listen, and I think our politicians, judging by the tweets that we've seen over the last few days, are taking note of it as well.
Well, we have to all owe you and the team at Hindustan Times both for flagging this issue. It had a lot of debate around it in its previous avatar, which was before the last elections. This election proved that actually digital media is to be taken seriously. It cannot be overlooked, even without the scale of large newsrooms that are backed by business houses. And I think that that has a lot to do with some of the new provisions that we're seeing in this bill, that I think we must all raise our voices to push for a more public and informed discussion to take place. Thank you, Nikhil. It's always a pleasure. One always learns so much from you. Thank you and take care. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.